Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm Alan Liska, and this is the Green Archer Comics YouTube channel. And I want to do something a little different today. I know I've been doing a lot of things a little different lately, but I want to respond to a question that was asked on the Awesome Comics podcast, episode 515, which I will link down in the description. And the question came from Pat Mills, who's the founder and creator of 2000 AD. I think it's a really good question. And I think the answer that I have might be a little different than what other people have come up with. So the question that he asks is, have we caught up with the future? Has science fiction finally run out of road? And I've been thinking about this question a lot lately, and I'll get to why in a minute. But we see the same tropes used over and over again in sci-fi, and we very rarely see new additions to sci-fi at this point. We might see refined versions of things, we might see better versions of things, but most sci-fi that we see actually has a lot of the same stuff that we've seen for the last 50 years. And I think it's the fault of Buck Rogers. And let me explain why. So, Buck Rogers has served as an inspiration, direct or indirect, for now three generations of sci-fi writers. And I think we've now reached the end of the tech that inspired Buck Rogers to start with. So if you look at the original Buck Rogers stories, 24, 19, 18, and the Air Lords of Han, so many of the things that we see in sci-fi are there. Jetpacks, gravity belts, spaceships, floating cities, drones, visual communication between people, ray guns, like all of that is in those first couple of stories. And then all of that translated into the comics. And then you have a 50-year run of comics that was constantly inventing new sci-fi. And that sci-fi inspired other people. So most famously, Flash Gordon was a response to Buck Rogers, right? And so the sci-fi that you catch from Flash Gordon is because of Buck Rogers. But it's not just Flash Gordon. Very specifically, Philip K. Nolan's early work, Zap, is based on a Buck Rogers ray gun. And at times Philip K. Nolan either really, really hated that story or loved that story, depending on when you talk to him or who he talked to. That's just Philip K. Nolan for you. Ray Bradbury is another one, and I'm going to read this from a 1990 article in the Guardian, where he said where they said Ray Bradbury was mad about the Buck Rogers script, but his friends in fourth grade made fun of him. Buck Rogers wasn't important. The future wasn't going to happen. So he tore up his entire collection of Buck Rogers scripts. So apparently he would go in and he would cut them out every day. So he'd have a full collection of them. And he said one morning, about 2 weeks later, he woke up crying. I asked myself, why am I crying? Who died? The answer was me. I asked, why am I dying? What am I dying of? The answer that came was I was dying because I had destroyed the future because I had listened to those fools. Then I said, well, that's the solution. How can I not die? And the answer was, go back and collect comic strips and Buck Rogers and make your life whole. So I went back and started collecting again. All of a sudden, my life came back, all of my love. So two of the most influential sci-fi writers are directly or indirectly inspired by Buck Rogers. And how much has Philip K. Dick and Ray Bradbury stories influenced generations of other sci-fi writers? But of course, it goes beyond that. Gene Roddenberry famously was, he pitched Star Trek as a Western but in space, wagon train but in space. But he also was inspired by the Buck Rogers scripts. And so all of the Star Trek universe that we have came from Gene Roddenberry, who got his inspiration from Buck Rogers. George Lucas absolutely credited Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon serials for how he wanted to do Star Wars. And in fact, he approached Franzetta, the one of the Buck Rogers artists, about doing a cover for the Star Wars novelization. They couldn't work out an agreement, but he very much said that Famous Funnies 213, that cover was a inspiration for Chewbacca, and then Famous Funnies 214 was the cover that cover inspired the Death Star. So Star Wars, all of the people who are influenced by Star Wars are indirectly influenced by Buck Rogers. And then when Franzetta actually couldn't work out an agreement with George Lucas, he did do work for Battlestar Galactica. So again, if you were inspired by either the first Battlestar Galactica or the second Battlestar Galactica, you are indirectly inspired by Buck Rogers. But this is now a 100-year-old story, almost a 100-year-old story, and the limitations of what the original authors and the original artists and so on, what they could do 100 years ago is very different than what we could do today. But I think we're still stuck in the framework that was created by the original Buck Rogers, and we need to kind of break out of that. And I think there are some that do. So if you read some of the work by Rebecca Roanhorse, and admittedly that's not in comics, although she has done some comic stuff, you'll see a sort of a different perspective on sci-fi, more of a supernatural combination sci-fi type thing. And those stories are, I think, more unique and interesting. But a lot of sort of mainstream sci-fi, the stuff that we see, although again, Rebecca Roanhorse is a best-selling author, so I think she counts as mainstream. But if you're looking at TV, movies, etc., a lot of the sci-fi is, now third or fourth generation from Buck Rogers. And since we've kind of hit the limit of that material, we're stuck in this sort of, never-ending cycle of creating, minor additions to what was originally truly breakthrough sci-fi. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're working on a Buck Rogers book. We want to tell the original story, we want to retell the original story, but also, if we have success with it, we want to be able to tell more and unique sci-fi stories that break away. And I'm hoping that we can find authors and like Chris Field, who is writing our current who wrote our current Buck Rogers script, who can think beyond the framework that's been established by these, descendants of Buck Rogers, into what the next generation would look like. And I'm really looking forward to that challenge, but I think it is interesting. Anyway, if you want to follow and find out more about what we're doing with Buck Rogers and when our Kickstarter is going to go live and all that other stuff, subscribe to this channel, or if you click in the description, we'll have a link to join our mailing list and be able to sign that. So awesome awesome comics podcast, guys. I hope this gives a good answer. Tony, Dan, and Vince, thank you so much for an amazing podcast, and I think a really insightful discussion, and I really appreciate it. And thank you all for watching, and look forward to more videos.